Let's take you back to the High Court in Pretoria, and this is where the Senzo Meyiwa trial is being heard, the murder of the soccer star. And we know now that the court has adjourned for a short time. Let's quickly check in with Linda Mnisi. Linda, good morning to you. So quickly bring us to speed as to the letter that Judge Chifuwa Maumela is going to read in the chambers before the legal teams, and the connection of that letter to one of the lawyers who's keeping a watching brief, wanting to come back to the court and be given access to all the court documents. Is there a connection there?
Well, yes, indeed, Xoli. You remember that initially there was a lawyer or a legal representative who was in this court and was on watching brief. This morning, when the matter began, the lawyer for the state, Advocate Baloyi, telling the court that before we proceed with the day's business, there is indeed a letter that they received. It is from, a legal representative who was on a watching brief for one of the witnesses, and that witness, or rather that legal representative, would like to be allowed back into court and also gain access to some court documents related to the trial, and some are related to the bail application. But you'll remember, in any form of communication that happens in a criminal matter such as this one, all parties need to be furnished with the relevant document, be it an application or a letter. All parties need to be furnished, Xoli, and one of the questions that was asked in this court was whether or not all parties were furnished with this document. It seemed at this point that it was the state, as well as the lawyer for accused number 1 to 4, Titi Tomanu, who had only received the letter and caught sight of that letter, Advocate Mshololo, saying that she had not caught sight of the letter, and that, of course, sparking a reaction from the judge, saying that the author of that letter ought to have known that there are a number of parties involved in this matter, and therefore that they also needed to be furnished with that document in order to peruse it and be able to respond adequately. Not only respond, but also take instructions on behalf of their clients in order to be able to respond to that particular letter adequately. So at this point, the judge then adjourning, going on a short adjournment, saying that he will go and read this letter outside of these proceedings, and then will also give Advocate Mshololo an opportunity to also go through that letter, and then of course we'll hear the submissions after. But it's also important, Paul, to remember that early this year, at the start of this trial, there was the lawyer for Singer Khumalo, Magdalene Munsami, who was on watching brief for her client, and ultimately, before the state could even call its first witness, she was asked to leave, and that was based just on the purity of this matter. One of the concerns that were raised at the time was the issue around, testimonies that may be given about her client while she's in court, and therefore the decision was that based on the purity of this matter, it would really be a just decision for her to step out and be asked to leave the court, and that's how she left the court. The author of that letter, it's important to say, has not been mentioned in this court, and therefore it's unclear at this point. They haven't confirmed if it is indeed a letter from Magdalene Munsami, but we'll hear upon the return of the judge, as they are, of course, he's of course in the chambers going through that letter, and so is Advocate Mshololo.
On that last element, I understand that at any moment our conversation could be cut short because the court may resume, and you're happy to return and take your seat. But while we still have time, now that you bring up the matter around Magdalene Munsami, yes, I understand it's based on pure speculation as to whether this letter comes from Magdalene Munsami, who has been keeping a watching brief on behalf of singer Kelly Khumalo. Is it clear now, Linda, whether Kelly Khumalo will indeed be one of the witnesses that are called to testify? Because the state prosecutor has been coy, or basically mum, to confirm for the record whether or not Kelly Khumalo, including her family members, may be called to testify.
Well, as you rightfully pointed out, Xoli, the state has been playing or keeping the cards very close to his chest in terms of who exactly is going to be called. Kelly Khumalo's name has been mentioned a number of times in this particular matter. The involvement of herself as well as other family members who were inside the house at the time of the shooting. And you'll remember the defense during many occasions did indeed ask whether or not she would be called to the stand. At this point, they haven't revealed whether or not they will call her to the stand, trying, by all means to avoid all of those questions that are related to the witnesses and who those witnesses are and whether or not they will come. Even with Tumelo Madlala, you'll remember it was unclear on who exactly that witness who was in the house would be called onto the stand. It was only in that morning that we saw Tumelo Madlala arriving in court. So it's unclear at this point only whether or not she will be called, but her name certainly has featured prominently in this matter, not only through news headlines, but also through some of the statements that have already been read out in court. You will remember also the defense mentioning her name, saying that there are certain witnesses that will come and testify about her, and related to specific incidents that happened on that particular night. Of course, we know that she was driving that vehicle that took Senzo Meyiwa to Butsilong Hospital on the night of the shooting itself. But as things stand at the moment, it's pretty unclear on whether or not the state will bring her in an effort to try and prove its case.
Linda Mnisi, let's allow you to take your seat, giving us an update from the courts and setting things a bit clearer for us. So a letter has indeed come from one of the lawyers who has been keeping a watching brief on behalf of someone, and the name of that lawyer not being revealed before court. Instead, the judge preferring that he is going to read that letter in his chambers before the legal teams that are in there. We're going to take you back to the court as soon as it resumes. For the